Most software developers die with their best ideas and concepts sitting in their head or in their notes app. Everything from startup projects to SaaS tools to side projects, ideas that could have existed but never did. And I've been building and writing code for a decade now, and something that's been bugging me is out of the millions of lines of code that I've written, the production systems that I've built, all of that, I've never really built anything for myself. And I'm starting to realize that's become a problem. What's up? My name is Byron. I'm a senior software engineer based out of Chicago, and in this video, I'm gonna be working on building one of those ideas that's been sitting in my head for quite some time. The idea that I have is a very micro problem. It's a problem that I'm one of the only people that it affects, and that's because I have so many credit cards. I like to take advantage of credit card benefits for traveling and getting cheap food, cheap stays, cheap flights, things like that. However, when you have so many credit cards and each credit card has its own list of benefits, it becomes very difficult to keep track of all the benefits that each card gives you. So the idea that I had was to build an app that would essentially allow you to have a wallet of credit cards, and you can just browse through really quickly to see each benefit that each credit card gives you. So I did get started on building the crux of the app. I have the Hello World piece set up. I have it whereas we can actually launch the app in the digital Android emulator. And I'm currently building this with React Native as well as TypeScript, and Express in terms of the actual framework. And I'm planning to continue to build this out, but first I need to outline the concepts of what it all, what I want the app to be essentially. If you're familiar at all with something like the Apple Wallet, whereas you have a series of cards that you can cycle through, that's kind of how I imagine the first iteration of this UI looking. So you'll have your first card, and then you'll have a collection of cards behind it that you can cycle through. And below this collection of cards, you'd essentially have, let's assume this is like the Chase Sapphire. I have no idea how to spell Sapphire, geez. Then below that, you have things like your list of travel benefits. You have your list of food benefits. So essentially, you can take a look at all of these very briefly, and from there you can deem which card is important for your current use case. Now, I have some other ideas apart from this that would really elevate this app and help bring out more benefits, as well as just your ability to utilize your cards to the best of their ability. However, I'm not going to think about that too much right now because this is the MVP, right? One of the tough problems when it comes to carrying on a side project is remembering everything that you were doing when you come back to it. Fortunately, I did build out the README for everything that I did. And also, fortunately, I didn't do a lot. I just built the app to get it to the point that it can run in the emulator. I built out the README. I started to build out little bits of the backend. And so now that I have a rough idea and a rough sketch of how I kind of sort of want the UI to look, that is a good step. The next piece that I really want to focus on now is figuring out what the backend is going to look like and figuring out what endpoints that I need, how I'm going to start to store data and stuff like that. So I want to really dedicate my time towards that today and hopefully start to carve out bits and pieces of the front end of the application so that we can start to get some dummy credit cards up, as well as load some benefits data in like the paragraphs and lines or bullet points that we had shown in our sketch earlier. So I'm really excited. I'm pretty sure when I left this app, everything was running perfectly, but now I'm trying to run it and it seems like it's a Prisma issue, something to do with like the Prisma versions, as well as the way that the class is being initiated for the Prisma client, which brings me to an important point. One of the things that I had chosen to do with this app was to experiment with the Prisma ORM, which I have very little experience with. However, I think this is a great opportunity, or any side project for that matter, is a great opportunity to work with tech that you haven't worked with before, as opposed to doing it on your day-to-day job, right? It's a lot easier to convince yourself to work with new tech versus trying to convince your boss to allow you to work with new tech. So that's my logic and rationality anyway. However, one of the drawbacks currently is that my app isn't working. So I need to figure out what that problem is at the moment. So just doing some debugging. All right, so we are back to square one. I got the hello world bit of the app loaded, and now we need to get back to what we were originally planning to do, which is to build out the back end of this application and see what that's supposed to look like. Something that's interesting to me, at least, is this is actually the first project or side project that I'm using Claude Code to really build out intentionally. And now that I have several months under my belt working with AI in my day-to-day work, I have a pretty solid idea on ways to make it better for building out my own project. In terms of how I'm planning to approach this, and something to note for those of you out there who are looking to start an application, building things with AI and whatnot, is to not only build out the crux of the app, like, getting started with just the basics of the application, package installs, making sure you've got hello world and like some endpoints stood up where you can check the health of your application and stuff like that. Also, now you need to pay attention to the setup of Claude and whatever other AI tool it is that you're using. So for me, I built out the Claude MD file, which essentially just defines to Claude what it is that we're building and how I want it to be built, right? So things like, hey, I'm building out an iOS/Android application that helps people with managing their credit card benefits. And I want to ensure that we're building things out to the best practices and standards of things like Prisma, Express, TypeScript, etc. And I want you to be up to date and well versed on these things, right? And I also can give it the structure. So I define things like my controllers folder, my services folder. I define where Prisma goes and things like that, so that Claude has a pretty solid idea on what it is if I tell it to build something, where things should go, how things should be structured, and what things to keep in mind. So I definitely work with AI tooling in a very iterative standpoint. I don't allow it to just run amok like a lot of people do with the new vibe coding trend. I'm very, very pragmatic when it comes to writing code, and that's just my demeanor. Can't help it. But it's also helped prevent me from going through a lot of pitfalls that a lot of people tend to do when it comes to writing code with AI. So I am pretty excited to, use tools like Claude and other AI tooling. However, I also know the limitations that a lot of these tools can possess. And because of that, it helps me work with them in a much better way than someone who does not know those limitations. All right, now that I've got the Claude MD file written out, one of the next steps that I want to take is building out the database structure, the database schema, as well as what the backend endpoints will look like. Not super sexy, not super pretty. We're not, building out the beautiful designs of the application just yet, but these are pretty important parts in regards to how this app is going to work, right? I need to know and have a picture of how I'm going to store the credit card info, as well as the info in regards to each of the credit card benefits. I need to start mapping out how you're going to be able to search for credit cards if you want to add one into your digital wallet, right? So things like that. And before I do that, now that I think about it, I should probably start to define features, which I started to do in the last video, but I never quite finished. So I'm definitely jumping ahead of myself and jumping into the tech of things, which I can't help it. I'm a back-end engineer. That's the thing. That's what I do. So I need to put on my project manager hat or product manager hat, and I need to define what features this application is supposed to even do. So let's get to that. Probably the most important aspect, apart from actually showing the benefits of each card, is the ability to be able to search through a list of various credit cards that exist with various benefits. You need to be able to search through the list of the entirety of credit cards across multiple companies, right? So that includes American Express, that includes Chase, that includes Capital One. And I think that this feature is one that I definitely need to nail, because if this part of the application doesn't have a good user experience, so you can't find the thing that you're trying to search for, and results aren't popping up, then it's just generally going to be a horrible user experience. And just like that, it's lunchtime. MCCB, which is one of Chicago's best Chinese food restaurants, just period. They also had a Michelin star, which is rare. If you're in Chicago, MCCB, highly recommend. All right, now that we've got lunch out of the way, the next thing that I want to do is write out what the database schema should look like in my notes. So I typically will write this down in notes before I actually start to implement the database models and tables through migration. So that's what I'm doing here and defining the relations. And after I've sketched out what I believe the database schema should look like as far as a rough draft in my notes, then I start to implement it in the code as I'm doing here. And one cool thing that I had found in implementing this with Prisma is Prisma actually has a really cool UI that allows you to view what the database schema looks like from a high level, and I thought that was pretty cool. I've made a considerable amount of progress from where I'd started to where I am now. Built out a good chunk of the back end in terms of the architecture and just getting the patterns that I want to see set up. I also built out and stood up a couple of new endpoints. One for allowing you to create a new credit card so that that credit card info gets stored and saved to the database, and another endpoint for being able to fuzzy search through the credit cards that we have saved in the database. So that said, if you're viewing this, please, please, please let this be the sign. If you have that app idea in your Notes app, or you have that app idea sitting in your head, go ahead and make it. Start that startup, start that side project, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't even have to ship it immediately. You can ship it months from now, but start something. And I hope to see you next week as I continue on building out this app idea as well as other videos and video ideas. So if there's anything you'd like to see in the future, post in the comments. Catch you later.